fuck? No rock like Jay-Z. You dig?
I might eat it, I might lick it, but that's why I'll never play. Every time I dress myself, it go motherfucking viral. Pussy niggas still is sweat, when my shit back like we say. I'm my ass so fucking good. I don't know that whole ass like she did. Insurance on my money like a red. Every time I see her, she looks clean as fuck on the crib, but that's another bed. I can never love a fucking ass, suck my dick like Bieber, nobody head. Cocaine white like Justin Bieber, bitch. I might show the way to keep the bitch. I might want it, but I don't need the bitch. I've been flooded out by Jesus, bitch. I want your piece of Little Caesar, bitch.
Teacher, we talking shit. I just want to neck like a giraffe. I'm a fish in water, I'm a bat. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that was a regular shit, yeah. That's tough.
Caesar blacks!
No. I gotta check my inventory. I'll be right back. Fuck, I gotta take that down. Fuck. There you go, girl. Sound good, go party.
To a penthouse, Miami Beach. Yeah, yo. Niggas talk crazy on tweets. They don't want it cause I come to defeat. They don't want it. I peep. These niggas all sweet. Bamboo sticks all in the Jeep. It's a new weirdo every week. Either one put it up for my seeds. Put it up. No cure for the IG disease. No cure. Anything for clout. They do anything for clout. Do anything for clout. They do anything for clout. Do anything for clout. They do anything for clout. Do anything for clout. Bitch, watch your mouth. Bitch, stay in your place. Bitch, get out the way. Move. My bitch on your ass, QK. Yeah, no disrespect. The nigga be tripping, but we love, yeah. Swapping out cars with my bitch. I bought her the Lambo, she bought me the Wraith. Practice, 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 make perfect. Nigga, it's never too late. Never, never. I see the out of the snake. I take the soul out the snake. Then I see the bills up out of the bank. The blog and the media fake. Shout it DM me, I'm straight. I'm not gonna bite on the bait. Sipping no toxic waste. On the low, what you pitching is great. Mask on the face, chase. Roger this out, we in shape. If I go broke, she gon' leave, escape. She gone. I put 2 million in the safe, just in case. Don't go my way. No cap, my kids gotta have money, not just me. It's selfish. Oh, I took the crown off the king like Mike the Elvis. Ooh, the world is wild, he dying, don't lie, they don't help him. Ooh, your bitch wanna eat up the drip, and you cannot help it. Straight to a penthouse, Miami Beach. Yeah, yo, niggas talk crazy on tweets. They don't want it cause I come to defeat. They don't want it. The niggas all sweet. Bamboo sticks all in the Jeep. It's a new weirdo every week. Get the what, put it up for my seed. Put it up. No cure for the IG disease. No, do anything for clout. Do anything for clout. Do anything for clout.
Oh shit. Fuck, I ate cigarettes. Fuck, there might not be nothing open. Mixtape. Used to be easier way of selling them. This clean as hell.
Today's word is voila. Voila is what you hear when your ATM fees magically disappear. With TD Beyond checking, fees go away. Gone. Poof. Au revoir.
Oh yeah, she's a weapon. Oh, it's like a sell shit. Yeah.
Banking with Chime is very easy. I feel like I can finally trust.
Yeah,
Is it the producer?
corn. What's fun? You nigga throwing slick shots now. You know what I mean? I go direct with it. You feel me? Yeah. Put a name on me, nigga. You want what he asked for? I couldn't understand what you was saying. And this bitch bound to get hurt. Cause a lot of these niggas be playing. And I fuck the shawty on the low. And I know she know I'm a man. So that extra shit gotta go. If I don't know, fuck my friend. She asks about it, I'ma be like, blah, 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 blah. Once you try to argue with me, I be like, blah, 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 blah. Try to get back with me, I be like, hell no. If me talking about no money, I'm like, blah, 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 blah. Small talk, don't do that. Theory, homie, you knew that. This damn shame on gang bang, but I beat them nigga do that. I'm in the old school, no do-rag. No old folk, like how you do that? You ain't fooling me, this ain't new to me. It ain't extra money, that's a new bag. But it clean though, and if you're late on the payment, boy, that's shit.
Get repo.
It's the only chance we have of knowing why Escape
Yeah, make a free throw. They gonna fuck their friend. Yeah, like a flu. Oh shit. You like a bad nigga. Like a hotel bitch. Safe big boy up. Bitch.
Not sure what to expect on your first day?
Oh shit.
A team member will show you around the gym. She'll ask about your motivation.
Oh shit, they just get a new weapon? They get a new axe?
Bring up any physical constraints you might have. After the tour, you will be introduced to your instructors, as well as provided with any necessary equipment. If you're participating
Right here.
in a striking class, such as boxing or Muay Thai,
Oh, he's already had that. And then I got a new.
you'll then get to participate in one of our intro classes, specially designed for beginners. After the class, a team member will sit down with you and discuss your
This guy new.
and potential challenges. And how you can help. Our classes are taught by professional instructors and organized into different skill levels, each level possessing its own process and curriculum. Our uniquely designed programs will improve your fitness while you gain essential self-defense skills, all in a positive learning environment. Whether you are a total beginner or an advanced pro, we got you covered. We look forward to meeting you soon.
Chill.
Hershey Park Christmas
You've got to stop him. The fake dog is here. He's dead. I did it. Get away. I'm too third in my phone.
Shit. Can't put this cigarette.
Show me what we are not playing with the same shit. There's murder, no murder for her.
You're wasting that.
This man is a heretic. He's possessed. He's a Templar assassin.
She got him low. She got the real with the niggas, and she get a man better than the bitches I'm getting.
Damn, these jacks, too.
It's after a collection of 8 oldest robes and adventures.
Man, come on. I'm gonna grab my food real quick. Oh shit.
Hey, we got time, we gon' ride. You my time, you my slime. Young girl gon' on my prime. Hey, so I think I ain't telling you lies. When you come to business, I'm handling mine. Yeah, I'm keep face part of my time. Hey. It's like Gucci my pants. She self dipping on head. I just spent the rest of my face. Special my legs. Special. Fur got bands. Another paint of red. Drink to the head. Got two cell phones. Yeah, I'm sipping these meds. Two-tone present Rolex. Yeah, this drippy can't catch. Simon say do what I said. People ain't choke my neck. Why I say Uber these jets? Call Miss VVS. Out of my wrist, counted and spin it. Mad at the coupe, mine with no tenant. Chop out the top, hit it in Lennox. I got some cash, I wanna spend it. New baby tag, don't wanna rent it. Too many fads, too many bitches. Roll my slime, get in my lizard. Better to slide, you a good slipper. Hey, we ain't got time, she ain't gon' ride. You my slime, you my slime. You don't gonna on my prime. Hey, so I think I ain't telling you lies. When you come to business, I'm handling mine. Yeah, I'm keep face part of my time. Patties on patties on patties on patties. Oh, okay. Burn up a check and I'm fucking baddies. Okay. Drop out this coupe and don't leave me no lady. RIP if you ever need like my daddy. I got some VVS's on my neck and my ears, they real dog. I just stay down and I run out the money. I got me a heel now. That's like give me a slime. I say that shit every time. I got some rickety rackets, running through bitches like backpage. I'm going #1 this year. Right on that bitch, I'm in 6th gear. I'm on the giant, ain't got no fear. Do all my dirt and it's raining. Wash away all the evidence. I got some chains and they team it. Ride a rave like it's raining. I rock your bitch, the vintage. I'm at the bend over relentless. I trip a dope if you need it. Put a Draco in my trench, yeah. I rub your hoe for the lead, yeah. I trip a double a year, yeah. I put a coupe on my bill, yeah. My business shit a whole meal. I did this shit with no deal. Dropped out of school about the building. I killed a cooch off the ceiling. Pop a Bugatti out of deal. I got on white, I can't kneel. Pour out the paint, watch it spill. Yeah, my lawyer, Brian Stell. Yeah. Out of my wrist, counted and spin it. Man at the coupe, mine with no tenant. Chop out the top, hit it the limits. I got some cash, I wanna spend it. New paper tag, didn't wanna rent it. Too many fads, too many bitches. Roll my slime, get in my lizard. Ready to slide, you will get slipped. Hey, we ain't got time, she ain't gon' ride. You ain't my slime, you ain't my slime. You don't got gun on my prime. Hey, so I think I ain't telling you lies. When you come to business, I'm handling mine. Yeah, I'm keep it.
Yeah. Hey man, my real niggas in this motherfucker, man. You feel me? Do the real nigga walk through for me, hey? I be feeling like the man when I walk through. I ain't studying what you're saying when I walk through. I got all these hoes staring when I walk through. I done make a few bands on the walk through. Watch me, hey, watch me walk through. Watch me, hey, watch me walk through. Watch me, hey, watch me walk through. I done made a few bands on the walk through. I done made a few bands on the walk through. People don't know now, don't talk to. Me and Parliament in the big hill boss too. Sitting at the round table making boss moves. I done walk through with Gucci on my feet. Who got more money, you or me? I'ma walk through usually with my nigga, better believe that I got the two on me. I done smoke past security. What the fuck do you need glasses just to see me? When I'm coming full speed, got that V12 running. And I'ma jump the fence if I see 12 coming. Even if I were blind, I could still smell money. I can't trust no outside niggas, they could tell them. I'm the alpha bad boy, cause I keep a L on me. I smoke good, throwing up my set in your food, niggas. I be feeling like the man when I walk through. I ain't studying what you're saying when I walk through. I got all these hoes staring when I walk through. I done made a few bands on the walk through. Watch me, hey, watch me walk through. Watch me, hey, watch me walk through. Watch me, hey, watch me walk through. I done made a few bands on the walk through.
Yeah, it's money over here. What you thought, clown? Play crazy while you high, had you knocked down. No frowns around here, bro. We all smiles. G7 just dropped, got us down.
Mars hurt the boy out when I walk through. Scarface before he died, did part two.
How your people tell promoters that I'm coming, park me in the front. Leave the shit running, here's 100, what up? Flip your bitch like a coin, better call it, nigga. She got a time for his big dick baller, nigga. She about to rock the boy Mike, tell it feedback. The realest nigga out my city and I mean that.
I be feeling like the man when I walk through. I ain't studying what you're saying when I walk through. I got all these hoes staring when I walk through. I done make a few bands on the walk through. Hey, let me walk through. Hey, let me walk through. I done made a few bands on the walk through.
Music. Yeah. That shit no stupid.
The fuck? There's gotta be somewhere you can hide that motherfucker. Yo, what the fuck?
YouTube TV has your favorite shows. Live TV from 70+ channels. Try it.
There's gotta be a way to get that off here. Cause you can't even put where the fuck you want it at either.
White Canary. First you get that money, then
Headshot.
you get that power. If he tune in, knows up, but he on that power. Now you walk around with 50 in your trousers. Diamonds booming on my chest, no fucking blouse. Bitch, I make it rain shower.
The Joker.
Ain't no thing.
Black Lightning. Aquaman. Harley Quinn.
She's not too far.
Raiden.
There we go. Shit.
Or else I'm killing them. Hey, and that's a fact. She blood all over my timber. She make a nigga say what? Cause she feeling more. She suck like 8 dicks, I call her. I took her on. Hey! First you get that money, then you get that power. If he tuned in, knows up, but he on that power. Now you walk around with 50 in your trousers. Diamonds bullying on my chest, no fucking blouse.
Man, this shit's taking forever. What the fuck? Jesus. Just to fucking do anything.
Bitch, I dig it. I eat ice cream with my chicken. Bitch, I'm rich just like a Simmons, not Lil Dicky. If I got legs, bitch, you know I'm gonna get it. She got the head, so she got it to my business.
Let's see what I get. Come on, give me a 2. Fuck. So 2. Fuck.
I need coke, like
2.
If you try to run off, you know we pop your night. First you get that money, then you get that power. If he tune in, knows up, but he on that power. Now you walk around with 50 in your trousers. Diamonds bullying on my chest, no fucking blouse. Bitch, I make it rain shower. You dig that? Ain't want no thing about you if you sell that. Hit him with that blocker, nigga, get back. Be that, never crack.
Perfect.
Who you a fool for this?
Oh Lord, just
No, I made no count.
Packing the mail is cold. She like I smell cologne. Yeah, I just had a deal, I'm on. Yeah. I go where I want, good. Play if you want, let's do it. I'm a young CEO, sure. Yeah. The first nigga play on my body in there. I just check my balance, I probably pull up to your hood and come buy me in there. No cap. You know that your hoe told you that nigga crazy. You caught with your hoe and I'm popping them both, now they hot just like
I went to Kratom on the phone.
Act like I don't know. Fuck it, I'm obviously winning. Don't make me go hit the bank and take out 100 to show you our pockets is different. I'm out with your bitch and I only want knowledge. She got a little mileage.
Ain't nothing to really do,
Me and I
man.
beat your ass up all in front of your partners and children. I'm the type to let niggas think that I'm broke until I pop out with $1 million. And take 20K and put that on your head and make one of your partners come kill you. Yeah, say fucking with me, then he gotta grow up. Cause this nigga gotta be killed. This shit I can't fit in my pocket. I got like I hit the lottery, nigga. I slap the shit out of nigga. No talking. I don't like to argue with niggas. I don't. Ain't gonna be no more laughing. You see me whip out, cause I'm gonna be the shot me a nigga. No cap. I don't follow no bitches on IG.
Yeah,
All your bitches, they following nigga. And that little nigga shit with that gun. He just pull it out in this pitch. Bitch.
Yeah.
Mail is gone. She like I
Especially one that can, that's decent.
Go where I want. Good. Play if you want.
Oh, man, my toe.
Young CEO, sure. Yeah. Packing the mail is gone. She like I smell cologne.
Guess the champs had. Fuck, might as well. Might as take get a promotion. Let's see, 480. 160 points. Be the Burby nigga in front of the store where your mammy and grandmama shop it. I shot on the whole other way. Let's see one of these little niggas top that. I'll turn a nigga into a converter. Push me a little nigga. Let's do.
hating and calling the groupie just cause she like all my music. She'll send me a text and to delete the message. She trying to find out it's confusing. No, these niggas thinking about you can rain on your head when you lose. I pull up after school and I teach you some shit. Tell you, bro, I'm a motherfucker too. Remember, I used to cheat off a pretty bitch test. All the teachers, they thought I was stupid. Was expecting the box to pull up on the truck, man, this nigga put up on the school. Packing the mail, it's gone. She like I feel.
Come on.
I just signed the deal, I'm on. I go where I want.
Dad, motherfucker, dad. Man, what you been raised tonight?
Packing the mail, it's gone. She like I feel, I just signed the deal, I'm on. I go where I want.
See, yeah, keep screaming.
I'm a young CEO, sure,
Oh, Firestorm? No, I've been working on mine. Shit.
No, I'm on that last diesel. All my children black shout out my BM, that's me. I love it like 400 rounds. It's me and Rihanna, I got my turn on that motherfucking TV. Everyone turn off your lights. I bet you still motherfucking see me. Yeah, you know it's a light show.
At least you'll die laughing.
Peace of mind. I'm making history with all the guys. I am not satisfied with getting by. I got the vision and I got the drive. I'm in infinity, feel the momentum.
Are those your bank fees?
Yeah, first there's the overdraft.
Man.
Then the maintenance fee, which I don't know what they maintain.
You should start banking with Chime. There are no hidden fees.
Gonna
and
watch
you
some
get paid up to
TV.
zero.
Let's see what we watch. That was a good movie too. Oh man, nothing to say, nothing to fucking do.
Okay. I called my manager and she told me to. And you have to, one, so I'm not sure how it constitutes it, but she hasn't been for most of the night. How many people are in the room? Right at the, okay. How many people are in the room? Sure. I'm ready for now. I'm ready. No established residency. How's that going? Going right here. Something from a ways out. I know, like, this is the first time I've ever worked. I've never worked here at this. First time. Like this is usually a blue door, and you see it.
Yeah. Huh.
The doors to this room, or did you see something? Police department, open the door.
He's banging on the door.
Police department, open the door.
Yeah.
Police department, open the door. What's the last thing you did? Talk to him? How long ago? 10 minutes ago. 15 minutes ago. I don't know, man. We'll keep knocking and we'll see if we answer. Can you go grab one just in case? Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, hold on. What's wrong with
Gonna stop by the apartment, guys. Daddy's got business. Did you get what you needed?
Yeah.
Feel the ocean's power.
Oh.
What time are you back? Can come in. And it's just us two. Like, you guys can come through here all you want. We haven't had any part of the meeting. We just came back and we had a conversation.
Oh, bro.
What this would look like 18 years later. All they have to work with.
And we just talked. And then we got a call from the front desk and they were like, we have
Hmm.
your room is turned up. And I was like, I haven't called here. It's just me and my fiance and we're just talking. And they said, well, everybody's complaining. And I said, I don't know why, because we don't even have a TV on. We don't have we were very quiet. And we were sitting at this table. We had a glass of wine.
Mm-hmm. Mercedes.
Lost and found. Wherever Adolf Hitler drove in his motorcade, the crowds turned out to cheer. A car ride and triumphant parade was his favorite form of public relations. But he was worried about assassins. So he had an armored limousine built for himself.
Let's see, you had two. Give me a three. Give me a three.
Through most of World War II. And then, in a bizarre twist of fate, the car.
So, what was that? 4,
It would take almost
6.
40 years to make a mountain of research to link it back to the Fuhrer.
Give me 4.
Hitler loved cars.
Come on, baby.
He rarely missed a chance to go to an auto
Damn. Hell no. 12.
Cruising along in one of his many giant Daimler-Benz limousines.
Come on, baby. Hook me up with a 4.
Hitler understood what the cars did for
Come on, baby. Jesus.
Mystique of the Nazi regime, the special emphasis they put on their public relations and their huge rallies and things like that, in which these cars were part of, and Hitler's position certainly gave the cars a great prominence and a central part in the sort of the Nazi
Come on, hook me with an extra shark. God damn.
But Hitler had plenty of enemies. So in early November 1939, Hitler's personal
Plus 22.
armored parade car. It was a Groza Mercedes 770, built to accommodate a standing passenger.
Plus 3. Alright, I gotta wait till I get some more energy. So what was that? Plus 3. I'm at 25. Damn.
Half-inch thick steel plating lined the floor.
How much do I need? After I buy that one, I need 250.
9,000 pounds. A leather-covered metal shield could be cranked up behind the rear seat. And the bulletproof window glass
2 minus 30 is 250.
even though Hitler was afraid of
Now what is it? 7 days to say?
it was a convertible. 8 months after the order,
7 divided 250.
the new Mercedes was delivered to Hitler's personal carpool in Berlin. And just 10 days after delivery, the Fuhrer was seen riding in it. Its service to the Third Reich had begun.
It would seem to
Let me try this. 32 times 7.
And so this was probably the thing he would bring out for the really special occasions, the big events, where he really wanted to make an impact.
Let's see.
September 10th, 1941.
7, 4, 21, 22.
November 1941, at a state funeral. March 15th, 1942, at the Südhaus to give an address on Germany's Heroes Memorial Day. In 1943, according to Daimler,
Damn, it's too short. That's only 224. 8. Damn, I need
And that is the last documentary photographic
35.
to the car at all until May
35
1945.
times 7. It's 35. 21, 24. Be 245. Still be short. That's 35. Fuck. But it says 8 days, so hopefully that's. Damn.
And then they approached the car.
I'm sure it would not be a major problem for them to get this thing off the railway flatbed. They were an armored division. They were used to moving heavy vehicles.
Once he got it down and running, Sergeant Azara asked the locals about the origins of the car. As the story goes, a local mechanic said that it had been shipped there, quote, because it was out of gas, and even Goering could get no more, end quote. From that day forward, the car was misidentified as belonging to Reich Marshal Hermann Goering. But despite the inaccuracy, Goering was of high enough rank to make the car a highly prized trophy of war. A day or so after the car was liberated, the war in Europe came to an end. But even though Azara had risked his neck to get the car, it wasn't his to keep. The vehicle that had once carried America's greatest enemy was now drafted for duty by the other side. With a bright Allies star painted on its side, the limo went into carpool service for 2 American generals. When the 20th Armored Division left Europe, the car came home with it. The Boston Daily Globe heralded its arrival with the headline, Goering's Auto Bullet to protect Fat Marshall's hide. The 4-wheeled POW was overhauled and put right to work. The car went on tour for the 8th Victory Bond drive.
The Mercedes was so much identified with Germany and its automotive industry. They had been so much a part of the Nazi mystique that, yes, that this was sort of paraded around.
Eventually, the car was put into storage at the Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, where it languished for 10 years. Then, in 1956, the government decided to clean house and auctioned the limo off for $2,700 to a Canadian collector. In 1969, the car changed hands again. The newest owner offered it to the Canadian War Museum in exchange for a tax deduction. The museum took the deal.
The caption put up there was Goering's car. There was some tendency within the War Museum to dissociate from Goering. And they were not convinced by the evidence.
That's when a librarian at the museum named Ludwig Koch became curious about the car. Koch found the factory vehicle number stamped on the firewall, the metal shield between the engine and the driver. By tracing that number back through the Daimler-Benz archives, Koch was able to document that the car was delivered to Hitler's own carpool. But that wasn't solid enough evidence that Hitler himself had used the car. The real evidence finally surfaced, literally, when the many years of paint were stripped off the car's original license plates. Koch found photos of Hitler in a car bearing the same license plate number. Still, because of all the restoration work, it was hard to make
one shot him
from the photos. So, Koch got out a microscope.
He looked closer at the photographs, and there are a lot of features this car has that other cars have, but all these features together seem to refer only to this car.
The lights on the front had changed. Under the windshield, silver cooling hoses for the supercharged engine, and short curved rear windows could not be found on any other vehicle of the Third Reich. Now Koch was sure. In 1982, at long last, the car was identified beyond a reasonable doubt as one of their own. The museum changed its display to reflect that.
Pretty soon the complaints started to come in that this is a bit too much. This is almost a Nazi shrine.
Does the vehicle's presence in the museum glorify Hitler? Or is it a worthwhile exhibit on the lessons of the Nazi era? The controversy has continued since the car was correctly relinked to Hitler. The exhibit has even been challenged on the ground that it should not be in the Canadian War Museum at all, since there is no direct Canadian connection to the limousine.
So it does create sort of some problems from us from the point of view of the museum. Undoubtedly popular. Hitler car. That's what it seems to be. Just keep the imagination perhaps a bit more.
Hitler's staff and parade car is currently on public display at the
Fuck, I'm not even going to be able to.
Ontario, Canada.
system around, and that's why they want to put that system. And it's interesting that at the end of the strategic rationing, they did enormously conditional ballistic missiles, which is absolutely critical because unless they can get themselves on top of it, it's very difficult to go on a nuclear war.
There's no way.
How you would survive a nuclear war and prevail in a nuclear war. With the revolution of the actual defense system, May Day parade, there was great concern that defense systems of this sort were going to be built in large numbers and spread around the Soviet Union.
We assumed that they wouldn't just defend Moscow, they would extend it across all of Russia or the Soviet Union. And we had to think about how would we respond to that.
For McNamara, a Soviet ABM system would challenge the policy of nuclear destruction. Constrained by budget, McNamara's dilemma was to choose between developing new offensive systems to penetrate the limit, or to develop anti-ballistic missile defense Soviet ICBMs. Three phases of flux: the group phase, the mid-course phase, and the holding phase. And you can try to shoot it down in any one of those phases. The early missile defense efforts were largely in the terminal phase because it wasn't possible with the technology of the time to see the missiles in the early part of their flight, let alone to attack them.
The Nike X was a revolutionary test. Revolutionary in the radar. There was a phased array, long early warning radar, and then two different kinds of missiles. A long-range
Fucking level 2, I need level 3.
and a short-range.
So I need any level 3 shit, there's some.
Actually exploded.
I can't fucking beat it yet.
They were not ever destined to be completely successful. One could think of a way to
Just see something here.
by bringing
Make these a wave.
missiles in line to the same target.
To defend cities
See if I can hook them up, because this level 3 is a big deal.
means you have to intercept high up in the atmosphere.
When you made the first intercept, you would create a fireball which would block out communications over a vast volume. The other missiles would continue to fly in their line and emerge. Your defense system would see
So
it,
I'm getting
would move out
free.
to intercept it, and you would have another fireball in a blacked out region. But of course, these are now stacking closer and closer to the target.
Maybe her.
They can ladder down in order to hide incoming warheads behind other warheads. For those reasons, we've never been able to implement the defense of cities, and that's the real problem. Defend our values against nuclear attack.
McNamara was confronted with technical challenges to ballistic missile defense, as well as its cost-effectiveness. In 1964, a study of defenses was prepared for Harold Brown, the Director of Defense Research and Engineering.
At the then state of ballistic missile defense, it didn't make sense to mount a big ballistic missile defense program. No matter how much you do
It's level 2 shit too.
defense, the other side
What you need for what's good? Yeah.
both sides would tend to build up their offensive forces to overcome any deployed ABM system, even though those ABM systems on both sides were likely to be ineffective.
So the buyer of defense didn't get anywhere. Spent his money on a lousy defense to face more offense.
It was this race that went on for decades between the offense and the defense.
I'm really mad if I can beat this.
Hardly any mobility.
Thank you.
And missiles were, and At times, one seemed to have the edge. At times, others seemed to have the edge. I mean, McNamara reached the conclusion that the offense had the advantage.
The proper response is expansion of our offense. Moves that could substantially increase our offensive capability is one way of doing it. The approach that was taken by the Navy was to develop a very small vehicle, the empty body, to carry a small nuclear weapon that could be put in large numbers on the front end of something like this. This was a move of what we call Poseidon.
Multiple reentry vehicles evolved into multiple independently targeted reentry vehicles.
Fuck.
Would essentially multiply the number of nuclear warheads the U.S. could deliver in a strategic attack. By August 1968, MIRVs were successfully tested with the Air Force's Minuteman.
I initiated, or at least approved, the research development of MIRV technology. And I think I was wrong.
McNamara thought he was wrong because he was worried about an arms race between the superpowers, what he called an action-reaction phenomenon. Despite his budgetary efforts to limit the growth of nuclear weapon systems, pressure continued to mount for an anti-ballistic missile defense.
President Johnson felt that something had to be done to protect the people. The president called for the deployment of Sentinel. Sentinel was to provide area coverage of the U.S. The arguments against it were based mainly on the recognition that the Soviet forces were so numerous that any
Right, dude. That worked out great.
was likely to be overwhelmed.
The announcement to deploy Sentinel launched a new debate. Experts from outside the Pentagon weighed in on the deficiencies of ABM, underscoring that no such system could provide a leak-proof area defense of cities.
The conclusions were that mid-course intercept ballistic missiles really doesn't work because there are too many countermeasures. You can put warheads in balloons, you can have additional balloons that in the vacuum of space look like warheads, and so you're pushed into terminal defense. That's fine if you're terminally defending your missile silos.
That system, even with that relatively limited mission, not trying to defend people, wasn't very effective.
Renamed Safeguard, the broad vision of an area population defense against nuclear weapons was traded for a point defense of Minuteman silos. But even in this truncated form, ABM was destined to be short-lived and would soon be overshadowed by new and competing policy initiatives.
The decade of the 1960s is a crucial one for the public responses to nuclear weapons. We have a series of crises. The Berlin crisis in 1961, when Kennedy advocates a renewed, intensified program of civil defense and fallout shelter construction. Then the Cuban Missile Crisis, when America seems to come very close to nuclear war. And then the Test Ban Treaty of 1963.
Finally, there has been acknowledgement that man's future rests in his own hands.
Oh my God, dude.
Has been initialed in Moscow.
The Test Ban Treaty was perhaps simply the first step in a series of treaties and negotiations with the Soviet Union. But once the issue of atmospheric testing was dealt with by the 1963 treaty, then deterrence theory and the whole strategy that flowed from deterrence theory, I think, did have a reassuring effect, at least at some level.
Perfect.
But nuclear strategy and public responses to nuclear issues were not unfolding in a vacuum. By '67, the Vietnam War was very much underway. attention and activist energies were increasingly focusing on Vietnam.
Fuck, man.
And when people thought of McNamara, they didn't think of nuclear strategic innovations, they thought of Vietnam.
In 1967, McNamara and Johnson were confronting the failure of their strategy of graduated response in Vietnam on a daily basis. At the same time, McNamara was struggling to navigate
Good, restarted. Fucking right.
Joint Chiefs of Staff for increased tactical support
Oh,
in
yeah.
Vietnam, while Air Force Chief of Staff General Curtis LeMay pressed for the continued growth of U.S. strategic nuclear forces.
Shit, refresh on 100 gold?
Thought that there was sort of no end to the appetite for more nuclear weapons. He wanted to basically say, I can cap the problem.
Hell yeah, 100 gold? Fucking right. Take all that shit.
Ensure that we can destroy them no matter what they do to us. We can write out a first strike. Our retaliatory capability, we can destroy everything of value to them. That's enough.
Arms control community.
Fuck.
Come on, man. Almost a cataclysm. It was a way to reduce the incentive for a first strike on either side, while ensuring a stable U.S. nuclear force posture for defense.
Let's make each side the hostage of the other, so neither side has to build up its defenses, neither side has to truly worry about a first strike because its retaliatory forces will be sufficient to wipe out the other side.
So I think that assured destruction as a device for putting a lid on the arms race was totally compatible with arms control. They kind of went hand in hand.
Oh yeah. You see right now. 3387. 3387. Hell yeah. Good jump. Man, I can't wait to fucking legendary his ass.
First in-person meeting of the two world leaders.
Mutual assured destruction became the foundation of an initial effort to engage the Soviets in strategic talks. While the meeting yielded no agreement, Glassboro was the beginning of a period of détente. In January 1969, détente would become the centerpiece of the Nixon administration. The new president and his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, sought to reduce Cold War tensions by increasing diplomatic, commercial, and cultural contacts with the Soviets, and especially through strategic arms control.
Nixon and Kissinger were very concerned that we needed negotiated arms control, not just for sort of a peaceful world, but to use it as a diplomatic tool to slow down the growth of the Soviet system, because we were not going to match them.
And therefore, it's very important to maintain stability. And how do you maintain stability? You maintain stability by trying to have a workable
Huge.
And that's what détente was.
Wow.
Within 3 years, arms control negotiators in Geneva hammered out an anti-ballistic missile treaty that significantly limited defensive systems. The talks also yielded SALT I, otherwise known as the Interim Agreement, temporarily capping the numbers of offensive missile launchers.
The Abraham Treaty was designed to enshrine, to institutionalize, as it were, mutual assurance.
That seems to be fun.
But it included one additional element.
Oh, yeah.
It included an estimate of technology that both sides basically had concluded. But at that time, deployment of ABM systems was not going to be known.
What shard? This game's crazy.
And also to allow, to strangely enough, to allow us to keep on building systems.
Yeah, I figured out why that noise happened. That noise was making, I forgot about. My fucking dad called. Said so many calls, and you answer. I think that's what, because it did it before.
Of the two sides at the level at which
That's what's up with that.
Which limited missile carriers rather than warheads, then it was inevitable to reverse it.
We moved forward with arms control and on the one hand, while on the other hand, going right ahead with MIRV missiles and going through several generations of MIRV missiles.
Then the side that deployed MIRVs would gain a huge advantage over the side that did not have them. And so both sides ended up deploying them. And we went very short amount of time from 1,000 warheads to 10,000 warheads, primarily as a direct consequence of the SALT Treaty. Prior to SALT I, we had basically an unrestrained arms race. After SALT I, arms race just went into another channel. We were down of missile growth and MIRVs and improved accuracy and that sort of thing.
The search for a new Strategic Arms Limitation Agreement began in 1974 as both sides quietly continued to modernize their nuclear forces.
We were determined that the drafting the American version of what would be the SALT II Treaty, that we would try to correct some of these things.
The concept of assured destruction and the fact that did lull people into feeling that the nuclear arms race wasn't that dangerous and there wasn't really any need to pay much attention to it.
If the threat of war with Russia is diminished, that means the threat of atomic destruction, global thermonuclear war, is diminished as well. So détente is crucial to understanding America's nuclear history in the 70s.
Both you and Secretary Layers have stressed the need for superiority over the Soviet Union. How do you distinguish between the validity of that stance and the argument of Dr. Kissinger for what he calls sufficiency?
Here again, I think the semantics may offer an inappropriate approach to the problem. Our objective is to be sure that the United States has sufficient military power to defend our interests. I think sufficiency is a better term, actually, than either superiority or parity.
When they announced the policy of strategic sufficiency in January 1969, Nixon and Kissinger appeared to accept that nuclear parity with the Soviets was a fact of life. Immediately following the announcement, Kissinger launched several interagency studies evaluating U.S. military posture and the balance of power. The objective was to develop alternative military strategies.
I mean, I think that Kissinger was in the camp that was skeptical of assured destruction, because assured destruction creates the impression of a kind of static situation. Once I have enough,
I gotta
have
go
to think
back to my race card
But
too,
this is an
man.
evolving situation. It's dynamic.
The defects
My race card's a beast. I just
of
downloaded the game
mutual
today,
assured
bro.
destruction were quite clear even beforehand. The studies that we did at Rand emphasized
I might be on 3-star his
that
ass, and
the
I can't wait to
capacity
get Green Lantern and hit that.
extended deterrence was diminishing simply because we would
This
be
game's alright. I don't care what y'all say. I got
if we continue to
fucking
talk
Black Manta.
about a massive PSYOP-like strike at the Soviet Union.
did
There was
that
a real
with
question
this started the game
over
months ago.
as you could go
Look how far I am
whether
already.
the U.S. would
I got the same million legendaries on this game already than I do in past fucking 3 years of Injustice 2.
In response to this question, Schlesinger argued that traditional answers are no longer satisfactory, and he recommended exploring the sub-PSYOP class of options.
So the notion was one would use nuclear weapons to strike in a limited area. That would convey to the Soviets that indeed we were serious and we were ready to respond.
Schlesinger, as an analyst at the Rand Corporation, was much more of the view that nuclear weapons had to be finely calibrated. He was very highly differentiated in his views of nuclear weapons.
Fuck is my writers?
Meanwhile, at the National Security Council, Kissinger recommended additional study for the kinds of situations which the president might actually face in a crisis. Specifically, it should examine more discriminating options than the present PSYOP.
When we were consulting with Henry Kissinger in 1969, we argued that they ought to have a presidential reserve force, which would be these limited options.
The top leadership, everybody, including Schlesinger, always thought in terms of limited options, and always had a struggle with that because the planning and the hardware were set primarily by the big options.
I think there was a desire from the earliest PSYOPs to have smaller options, and so there were, quote, smaller options, but they contained hundreds of weapons, and so they were not small at all. And so the structure of the PSYOP itself was such that you had small options, but they were embedded within larger options, embedded within larger options.
And so at multiple hundreds of weapons in the small options, there was every chance of bringing a massive response. If you're the Russians, and a small option were executed, you had a strike by ICBMs, and then 5 hours later you had the SLBMs, and then 18 hours later the bombers came roaring, and it looked like 3 separate attacks. For us, it might seem very specific, very carefully calibrated. For them, it might look like we were going to take out the entire society.
Fears about a diminished U.S. capacity for extended deterrence would soon be addressed by improvements in the accuracy of Minuteman.
We had been pressing for more accurate weapons so that we could be assured that we could pluck out this target or that target without major impact on the surrounding life, what was generally referred to as collateral damage.
Yeah, that one's just going to be hard. Fucking vein over there.
Because the idea now was to make weapons that were more accurate, faster to fire.
I think the technologists have driven.
I'm working on mine.
I mean, we could make this kind of a
heals up every time you hit him.
Therefore, we did.
Yeah, sure.
Therefore, the policy is fitting very well with how we're thinking.
But the improvements of accuracy were a normal consequence of the technology and of the military views about what's valuable.
250.
And they didn't derive from any great strategic thinking. Many other people read the improvements in accuracy in a different way.
See? And you can autoplay
I remember the day in June of 1970 when the United States announced that it was going to go ahead with
you don't see me winning.
We came to a fork in the road.
They're making some dumb moves, though. Like, why'd you all hit 3 separate people? Y'all could have killed.
Push forward with nuclear
they could have killed one of them.
The MIRV technology initiated by McNamara had come to fruition, providing target planners with a significant increase in the number of available warheads.
Man, this is some dry weed.
The rapidly retargetable and highly accurate MIRV Minuteman III also contributed to a revival of counterforce in strategic thinking.
I think a combination of the increase in numbers and the change in the quality being ever better for attacking military targets, and that was kind of thinking through that it wasn't just assured destruction.
On January 10, 1974, the now Secretary of Defense, James Schlesinger, introduced the policy underlying National Security Decision Memorandum 242, or NSDM 242. The new policy was quickly dubbed the Schlesinger Doctrine.
The selective strikes that I emphasized were intended to convey to the Soviet leadership that the United States would not be self-deterred, that we were prepared to initiate the use of nuclear weapons against Soviet territory, and that they should have that firmly in mind in making their plans.
We had, for the first time, an open statement by a U.S. Secretary of Defense that the United States did not merely have a mutual assured destruction policy, that actually wanted to have and did have and was trying to acquire and improve warfighting capability.
The warfighting capability, it was not intended to fight a war, it was intended to strengthen deterrence.
Basically, no.
Within a month of Schlesinger's public announcement, NISDM 242 prompted 4 major actions to increase the options available to the president. The new declaratory policy also briefly renewed public fears of thermonuclear war. But concerns about a shift toward a posture of nuclear war fighting were overshadowed by the administration's continued progress in arms control and the promise of détente.
Some people had always thought that this was like the priesthood just debating among themselves. It really had no operational significance. Others said, no, you're not right, that this will have an effect on thinking in key elements of the civilian and military leadership, and it will make the use of nuclear weapons more likely.
Making war more likely. That was not our view. We thought that it would make war less likely. If one wants to preserve the peace, as I think President Washington said, plan for war.
For many, the signing of the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty and the Interim Agreement in 1972 came to symbolize the essential stillness of the Cold War, where each nuclear adversary sought to limit the strategic arsenal of the other. U.S. efforts at arms control, together with changes in strategic nuclear policy, were based on the idea that the Soviets shared U.S. beliefs about deterrence and about fighting a nuclear war if deterrence should fail.
I think there was a view which was very widespread and pervasive that the Soviet Union must think about nuclear war in the same way as the United States.
In the mid-70s, the United States had fallen into a trap intellectually. We had fallen into a trap of thinking about what would deter us, and we mirror image that onto the Russians.
It's important to recognize that it's what the other side thinks that deters the other side, not what you think.
Right after the Moscow summit in 1972, the number of tests of Soviet missiles just expanded exponentially, and they began to introduce MIRV capability and more accurate guidance.
The fear was that they could put large numbers of warheads on those same missiles, and that then they could effectively threaten our land-based deterrent.
So you began to get real worries, not only about the capabilities of the new systems, but about the thinking that lay behind these deployments. What were they?
We have to beat this one.
President Gerald Ford and Secretary of State Henry Kissinger thought they knew what the Soviets were thinking when they met with Leonid Brezhnev and his advisors in November 1970.
There we go.
Gerald Ford continued to invest heavily in strategic arms control, and the SALT talk continued to pace during his short-lived administration.
He was shield.
We're going to have a great government, a
There
great
you go,
nation.
hammer.
It's because of you, not me.
Perfect. Following the upset victory of Jimmy Carter as president, progress on arms control slowed as the mood in Washington shifted away from détente and toward defense. In 1977, Paul Nitze, the consummate Cold Warrior who had written in the present danger. The committee posed frightening hypotheticals that would leave a U.S. president self-deterred in the face of a Soviet counter-force attack.
Whipping ass, bro. Hell yeah.
A window of vulnerability in which a Soviet first strike would destroy the U.S. ICBM force.
The committee argued that the remaining U.S. nuclear forces, the bombers, and the ballistic missile submarines would not be effective in counter-force operations.
So that sort of forced the U.S. back to an assured destruction attack, primarily against cities.
U.S. retaliation with, SLBMs would be deterred by the fact that the Soviet Union could then retaliate against American cities.
There would be strong pressures for us to halt the conflict before either side launched their final forces, and in which case we would have lost because most of our nuclear force would be destroyed.
such an approach, which left things unequal, worried.
The mood in Washington recalled earlier periods of increasing vulnerability. The first Soviet atomic test, the launch of Sputnik, and the worries of a missile gap that followed. The U.S. watched as the Soviets exploited local conflicts in Angola, Mozambique, and Ethiopia, and as they expanded their political and economic influence. Then, in October 1977, the Soviets alarmed the Europeans with the deployment of the highly accurate SS-20, a MIRVed IRBM aimed at NATO military targets. West German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt publicly declared that the Soviet SS-20s represented a major new threat to NATO, which demanded a response. Others, like the Committee on the Present Danger, asserted that the deployment of SS-20s created a broader imbalance in theater or tactical nuclear forces.
The Soviets saw the future military balance as something they were tilting in their own favor.
There was a famous article by Richard Pipes called Why the Soviet Union Thinks It Can Fight and Win a Nuclear War, in which he argued, they didn't accept the theory of deterrence. In the last analysis, when you're in the depths of a crisis, what really would deter them? And some people would say the only thing that would deter them is the knowledge that they would be defeated.
Much more important was growing evidence that they had built very heavily protected deep underground shelters in the Moscow area. And it did become clear that at least the leadership was planning seriously to survive the nuclear war.
Jimmy Carter entered office championing arms control and challenging the Joint Chiefs to consider a minimum deterrent nuclear force consisting of fleet ballistic missiles.
You're fucking up. Holy shit. You're really fucking up.
One of the first questions he asked during the first presidential briefing on nuclear plans, why don't we just have a survivable force of 200 missiles? I think may have been the beginning of the end of his credibility with the military.
Damn.
Within his first year in office, the president confronted an increasingly aggressive Soviet adversary. Now, in the face of new and worrisome intelligence estimates, Carter issued Presidential Directive 18 that launched a review of U.S. targeting policy.
You're jumping on him and then save her life.
Led a seminal study called the Nuclear Targeting Policy Review.
I think a critical driver was a reassessment of Soviet strategic objectives. And then we also assessed how they were building and deploying their forces.
Fuck, man, he wants to fucking...
They believed that they could survive a nuclear war, they could control a nuclear war.
What Schloss's study came out and said was, you're dealing with people who look at nuclear war differently.
Yes. No. Oh shit, here we go.
These guys have a different view.
Here we
what
go.
you need to do if you're going to have an effective deterrent is get into the mind of the Soviet leadership, figure out what they value, and hold it at risk.
Sucking me up though.
Their own lives were important.
Look at this, hell yeah. Look at this. Michael Hill. Bam. Bam. So shit, beast.
Therefore, the countervailing strategy.
She can heal anybody. And she hits hard.
Countervailing strategy.
Here we go, got it.
I woke up one morning and said for the posture statement, we needed something a little bit different to help Secretary Brown and get him some publicity. And I said, why don't we call it countervailing instead of counterforce or something? And so I can't even remember whether I discussed it with Hal or whether I just put it in the posture statement.
He's fucking 90 years old.
Not a thing changed.
PD-59, however, had an important breakthrough. It was an attempt to look at deterrence through Soviet eyes. And that became the basis for the notion of having many options, having them nested.
Discouraged to discover that there was a notion that we might attack the Soviet political leadership. And
okay, I got free gold day. Let's use it.
All possibilities of restraint would be destroyed at that time.
On the other hand, if the leadership on the other side is convinced that, well, things may go badly, but we'll survive in the end, that's not as much of a deterrent as the thought that if things go badly and if we can't reach a settlement before almost everybody before tens of millions of people get killed, you're not going to be able to survive personally.
This is the Harold Brown, we're not going to win a nuclear war. We know that. We need to make sure the Soviet leaders understand the same thing.
In an era of strategic nuclear equivalence, the U.S. sought to deny the Soviets any possibility of victory by remaining capable of fighting successfully. PD-59 signaled a decisive shift away from the policy of mutual assured destruction toward a posture of nuclear war fighting.
But it was very clear in Harold Brown's mind that the purpose of this was to influence the Soviet decision maker, not to fight a nuclear war.
I never read PD-59 to say we expected to win. We read PD-59 as saying that we were to terminate hostilities That's quite different from winning.
In 1975, the snapshot would reveal two superpowers armed to the teeth, with the Soviet Union having more momentum than the U.S.
The nuclear buildup that began in the mid-70s was in response to the perception that the Soviet Union was pulling ahead of the United States. And we saw our comparative advantage being in technology, so we were always pushing our technological imperative.
In an age of sophisticated technology, the computer plays an increasingly large part in
they changed the name. I don't know how I got the name.
computer-generated code.
Trying to think why.
The neutron bomb
Come on, baby, give me something good. Give me something good.
was developed for the Sentinel system. And this was a warhead which would
Hell yeah,
kill
he's 5
by
stars.
strong
What?
flux of 14 million
They're
neutrons.
PvP, the PvP.
But once one realized that the kill was produced by
Yeah.
neutrons, people began to think about
Oh shit.
the possibility
Some
of
hard-ass
killing
ones.
people and not equipment or not facilities.
Particularly in relation to
Ain't never gonna be able to be all them. You want the fucking refresh.
selectively in Western Europe.
Tests were aimed at defining and solving the problems of tactical nuclear warfare. Could troops and vehicles move through the terrain in the wake of a tactical weapons blast?
The problem there was how do you defeat mass tank invasions without destroying all the villages which are about a mile or so apart throughout Central Europe. If you do it with neutrons, the idea was you can go to much lower yield and leave the villages and their inhabitants unscathed, relatively speaking. None of this would be very clean, and still get at the tank crew.
It's making nuclear weapons seem less threatening if they come to seem more like conventional weapons and actually can be used in theater operations rather than just to destroy cities.
In June 1977, the Carter administration's defense budget included the production of enhanced radiation nuclear warheads. The so-called neutron bomb was to be deployed on NATO bases and was described as the first in a new generation of tactical mini-nukes. By early 1978, Jimmy Carter found himself at the center of a heated debate that played out in the streets of Western Europe and at NATO headquarters. Protesters alleged that the neutron bomb would kill people, leaving
This is a war game.
One more.
It is used to develop military strategy. The tanks roll, the weapons fire, the soldiers march. One side wins, one side loses, and the generals get to watch. But how do you develop nuclear strategy? How did today's strategies evolve? This is a computer simulation of an atom bomb used in war. It is the latest tool of military planners. They must use it to test new strategies fit for the nuclear age. The challenge now is to develop a strategy to prevent war, not win it.
Nuclear weapons serve only one purpose. It's an important purpose, but it's a single purpose. And that's to prevent the use of nuclear weapons against us or our friends.
You can't use a gun against mosquitoes. Or you can't use something that will kill you against your enemy.
The weapons are there, they exist. We can't will them out of existence, but we can hope to manage their consequences so that those consequences are peace and security and not war.
The public can and must understand those technical details about nuclear weapons and nuclear arms race that are relevant to set policy. You don't have to know the size of the screw that you put in the nuclear warhead, but you have to know something about what it does. You have to know something about the effects of a nuclear war. You have to know something about the impossibility of trying to control such a war.
Nuclear strategy had its origin in World War II, when both sides used strategic bombing, the deliberate destruction of industrial and population centers from the air. Strategic bombing was meant to break the will of an opponent through terror and mass destruction. This was total war. Everything and everyone could become a target. Society was pitted against society. As the war raged on, a race began to make a new weapon ideally suited to the new strategy.
I worked in the Manhattan Project in wartime, of course, and I worked essentially out of fear. We believed the Germans were more organized, more able, and certainly more militarily directed than we, and we feared that the atomic bomb would appear first in the hands of the Third Reich, in the hands of Hitler.
The Manhattan Project, the American atomic bomb program, succeeded where the Germans failed. Yet it was not until 2 months after the Germans surrendered that the scientists were ready. A test was set for July 16, 1945. This device would release the force that holds together atoms. The test was called Trinity.
It appeared as though the sun had risen. What I hadn't thought of was it was not only bright, it was also giving out radiant energy, heat, and my face warmed up as though I were facing the morning sun in the cold desert morning, suddenly out of darkness, and in a minute it went away again. It was an artificial sunrise, so to speak.
Word of Trinity's success reached President
I'm getting fucked up.
Allies were meeting to decide the new political shape of the world. When Truman casually informed Stalin that the U.S. had a new weapon of unusual destructive force, Stalin replied that he hoped Truman would make good use of it against the Japanese. From Potsdam, the Western Allies issued a demand for Japan's unconditional surrender. The vast armada was dropping hundreds of tons of bombs on Japan, while 1 million men were being assembled for what was expected to be a bloody invasion. The Japanese still refused to surrender. The entire stockpile of bombs was sent to the Pacific, 2 bombs. Japan would be delivered a sudden shock in hopes of forcing its early surrender. On August 6th, the new weapon and the new strategy were brought together. Total war was finished.
No. Damn it.
I felt the bump of the airplane. I was very relieved that I knew the unit had gone from the airplane that we had successfully delivered It meant so much to Army Air Forces.
He's gonna hit this motherfucker hard. Bam.
Creating a fire of 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
So that's what I had to
By the end
do.
of that day, almost 50,000 people were dead. Another 100,000 were injured, a third of whom would die in the next weeks.
Damn, I got none of this? Oh, you want my
Here is
fucking...
one child who did not die. Here is the face of just one who witnessed that morning. The sun that rose from the west.
Oh, you gotta win new ones.
It is an atomic bomb, President Truman said. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe. If they do not now accept our terms, Mr. Truman said, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth.
On August 9th, another plane took off. A second plane, a second bomb, and a second city. Nagasaki.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President has just announced full acceptance of the unconditional surrender terms by the Japanese. I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which
Oh,
specifies
shard.
unconditional surrender in Japan.
Oh my god, dude. Can't get a fucking shard.
It is an awful responsibility which has come to us. We thank God that it has come to us, instead of to our enemies. And we pray that He may guide us to use it in His ways and for His purposes.
The Americans and Russians celebrated their victory. But beneath the surface camaraderie, there was already great mistrust. Professor Michael Knock.
The U.S.-Soviet relationship was always a marriage of convenience that only began when there was a common enemy, namely Nazi Germany. And once the common objective was met, all of the old differences came to the fore. There was a lot of discussion whether war with the Soviet Union would be the next phase of the Second World War. So it wasn't a matter
Play some of this, dumb.
of the resurgence of old antagonisms, ideological differences,
Yeah,
political rivalries, different economic systems, and two competing military powers.
Celebrating the Allied victory under banners honoring Stalin and Roosevelt, the troops enjoyed a very short honeymoon. But the American GIs would have to be brought home soon, leaving their Soviet counterparts poised across an exhausted
This shit goes faster than it does on a fucking...
to take it over. By October of 1940,
This
U.S. military plan
fucking console.
secret study. It was a contingency plan for defeating the Soviet Union with 20 atomic bombs. But at the time, the U.S. didn't have any more bombs. In actual practice, no coherent nuclear strategy had yet been developed.
The basic American approach was just to try and compete with the Russians in Eastern Europe, try not to let them take control of Eastern Europe, which in fact failed, and at the same time accumulate nuclear weapons, but never really quite know when and under what conditions we would use them, short of a direct attack on the United States.
Out of Bikini comes the amazing camera record of history's greatest military experiment. Joint Task Force 1 opens the final...
A year after the war, tests were begun in the Pacific to learn more about what the bomb could do. Former Ensign Bill Finnegan.
We heard the countdown, 10, 9, 8, etc., and the bomb went off. I think the most significant memory I have of that blast was the light and its ever-increasing intensity.
Yeah.
It was not going to stop, and I'm sure that others like me thought maybe this time there'd been a mistake and this was the end of the world.
The test dramatized the U.S. monopoly on atomic weapons and strengthened the impression of unequaled American power. The top secret fact was that at the time, the U.S. had only one or two usable bombs.
The U.S. has the atom bomb, the Russians do not have it, at least until 1949. And yet, that's a time when the Soviets, under Stalin's leadership, do very well in terms of consolidating their control over Eastern Europe, and making major territorial gains. So here, this tells you something about the limited use of nuclear weapons. The U.S. has nuclear weapons and was unable to use them in any way to prevent the Soviets from acquiring a lot of additional territory.
The Soviets, while publicly downplaying the bomb's importance, were straining to get it themselves. In Moscow, physicist Sergei Kapitsa.
All the necessary scientific background exists in our country, and it was a question of mobilizing our, I should say, technological resources, not only scientific ones, to solve the problem. And the main secret was now well known that the atom bomb can be built.
Igor Kurchatov headed the Soviet atom bomb project. He had constructed Europe's first atom smasher in 1939. In 1943, when the Soviets began their atomic program, Kurchatov was put in charge. His success came far sooner than Americans expected, just 4 years after Trinity. Professor Stephen Klein.
The detonation of the Soviet atomic bomb in 1949 didn't affect Soviet strategy at all. It gave them a weapon that they felt now they could at least match U.S. firepower. But it wasn't until Stalin died in 1953 that the Soviet military was allowed to the military officers were talking about strategy, continued to talk about the basic operating factors that developed out of World War II, the use of tank forces, the use of reserve, and excluded the atomic bomb.
Although neither side had a fully formed nuclear strategy, they pressed ahead with developing a superweapon, the hydrogen bomb. Ulugalab Atoll was the site of the first American test in 1952. The device would yield a force 1,000 times greater than Hiroshima. A piece of the stars brought down to Earth. With the H-bomb, even a miss of many miles would destroy a city. By 1954, both sides had it. The American nuclear weapons monopoly was broken. But the U.S. still had an important advantage, a monopoly on the means of delivering nuclear weapons. From forward bases near American bombers could reach almost any Soviet.
Hold on, how do you get these anyways?
And logistic superiority would make possible a new American strategy. By the early 50s, U.S.-Soviet relations had deteriorated dramatically. The coup the Berlin blockade, Korea, and other conflicts had developed into the Cold War. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, alarmed by what he saw as Soviet advances around the world, announced the first formal nuclear strategy in early 1954.
One of the lessons that some of the Eisenhower administration officials learned from the Korean War was why fight limited wars? Why sort of fight the communists on their own terms? Why don't we use our advantage? And they felt, and Dulles in particular felt, that our principal asset was still a major superiority in nuclear weapons. And therefore, Dulles articulated
Oh, that's the fucking... This is playing Japan graphic. These things have been applied. Reduce the frame rate. Different structure. I'm sure this is right.
Tests were also held to see how nuclear weapons might be used on the battlefield and how combat troops would react. shells to lightweight ace bombs. In the mid-50s, tactical nuclear weapons began to be deployed with the NATO forces in Europe. The Soviets had their own project. In Moscow in 1955, they unveiled...
Yo. Anybody? What's on? Who's on here?
They flew a single test squadron over the Moscow parade again and again. Shocked Western observers thought many formations.
This constant movement of bombers overhead was the effort to try to convince the West that the Soviets were a strategic power, and equal, if not better than the United States, and that there was nothing to be gained from.
Says push to talk. Push to talk.
Many times in the future,
Why you push?
In Soviet planning as well, it appears that with missiles, it appears that there's defense systems where they deploy phony systems that look real, and so that the West believes there's actually more than there is there.
Hi, America's on live.
U.S. intelligence estimated the Soviets were building thousands of bombers. For the first time, Americans did. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviets gave America yet another shot. If they could send a beeping metal ball circling the Earth, they could also deliver an atomic bomb to Washington and New York. U.S. intelligence began to focus on a new potential Soviet threat, missiles.
Sputnik is important because it gave Khrushchev, who was the Soviet leader at the time, the political power to cancel the bomber programs that were in progress and shift the entire structure of Soviet military forces and military strategy towards the concept of missile nuclear warfare, marrying nuclear warheads with nuclear missiles. And that became the basis of Soviet military thinking throughout the 60s and 70s.
In response to Sputnik, the U.S. speeded up its own missile program to close what it saw as a missile gap. By the late 50s, it was able to begin basing these intermediate-range missiles in Italy and Turkey, encircling the Soviet Union. Sputnik also forced a reevaluation of massive retaliation.
What Sputnik did in terms of strategy was to
This moves too fast.
That massive retaliation was any longer credible, because Sputnik showed that the Soviets had nuclear weapons, that the Soviets could use nuclear weapons on ballistic missiles to reach the United States territory in a very short amount of time. And therefore, it really wasn't believable that we would use nuclear weapons on Soviet territory if, for example, there was a small incursion in Southeast Asia.
A massive retaliation disappeared as a realistic strategy at the time at which the Soviets developed a credible nuclear capability of their own. We therefore went to the doctrine of which says in effect that we will respond in a fashion which is commensurate with the aggression. In other words, we'd meet conventional attack with conventional attack. If we went on to a limited tactical nuclear war, then we would respond with tactical nuclear weapons. In the case of a strategic exchange, we'd respond back.
We proposed flexible response with a very high threshold, meaning that we could hardly conceive of circumstances in which NATO could benefit by initiating the use of nuclear.
The new strategy was suddenly put to the test. In October 1962, aerial reconnaissance photographs revealed that the Soviets were secretly building missile bases in Cuba. The president called an emergency meeting of his top advisors. With missiles at its doorstep, the U.S. was threatened by nuclear weapons for the first time. On October 23rd, President Kennedy went on television.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response from the Soviet Union.
Many people rushed to stock up on food and supplies as the two nations seemed to edge toward war.
I can say without any qualification whatsoever that at no time during the Cuban Missile Crisis did we contemplate the initiation of the use of nuclear weapons. Absolutely none. However, some of the alternatives that we did consider were risks
The evidence suggests that the Cuban Missile Crisis was prompted by Khrushchev's effort to try and balance off U.S. strategic forces. Soviet intercontinental ballistic missile programs had fallen behind because of technical difficulties, and meanwhile the U.S. ballistic missile program was about to take off with the deployment of the Thermal. And the evidence is that Khrushchev then decided that one way to take up the gap in the short term was to deploy the medium-range ballistic missiles that the Soviets already had in Cuba to match the U.S. intercontinental force.
Following a quarantine of Cuba and intensive negotiations, the Soviets removed their missiles. For the U.S., it was a vindication. Because of nuclear superiority. That is not the case. The lesson is exactly the reverse. We prevail because
after the crisis was over, Soviet diplomats reportedly said, "We'll never do this again." And many people looked at me and now they decided to do something new. The fact that the Cuban Missile Crisis did was confirm the view of many of the Soviet military authorities that they had it right the first time, that Soviet military was based at home, based on the long-range intercontinental missiles, and that's where the program should concentrate. And the idea of deploying forces overseas was a mistake. So it really reinforced those that were arguing against the move originally. Developing after the Cuban Missile Crisis are a whole series of ICBM programs that had already been planned before the crisis and were put into operation.
The Cuban Missile Crisis brought in public awareness of the dangers posed by nuclear weapons. Concern over radioactive fallout developed into worldwide opposition to nuclear testing. The public began questioning nuclear strategy that previously had been prominent secrecy to experts. With both sides frightened by the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Central Test Ban Treaty was signed in 1963. The treaty restricted only above-ground testing. Its real significance, however, was in initiating the use of negotiations as an instrument of nuclear strategy.
First time we've been able to reach the
Man, it's just hard to fucking. Call of Duty's better shooting. I don't need a fucking weapon, though, I'll tell you that.
Help to create a new strategic understanding. By the mid-60s, the Soviets finally began deploying intercontinental ballistic missiles to the U.S. as expected almost a decade earlier. Both sides could now destroy the other from their own territory. Paul Warnke.
Then it became apparent that since we no longer were alone in possession of the ability to destroy another country, that we had to rely on deterrence.
Deterrence was a strategy born of necessity. Even if one of the superpowers were attacked first, some of its nuclear forces would survive. Those surviving forces would still be enough to destroy the country that attacked. Launching an attack would only bring the attacker's own destruction. So each side would
Somebody's in here.
never doing so. This strategic dilemma came to be called mutual assured destruction. An extensive U.S. buildup strengthened the deterrent effect of mutual assured destruction. Three systems were employed. The B-52. To avoid being caught on the ground if attacked, many B-52s were kept on constant alert. The fleet of 600 intercontinental bombers was completely modernized. The Polaris, a new kind of submarine that carried missiles. The missiles could be launched from underwater, and the submarine could carry as many as 16 of them. By hiding in the ocean and moving constantly, the Polaris could survive an attack and retaliate. The Minuteman, a new land-based intercontinental ballistic missile. It was made more survivable by burying it underground in concrete-hardened silos. Only a direct hit could destroy it. 1,000 were deployed throughout the Midwest. Together, the three systems came to be known as the Triad. The Soviets, however, took another path. Professor Mike.
They had serious technical problems with their bomber programs all along, so that option was put aside. The missiles were deemed to be superior. The idea of a Or the ICBMs, which were land-based that they could control, they could maintain in real time in order to keep them operating.
The Soviet deterrent relied mainly on their more numerous, eventually bulking up as strong and heavily protected. Enough could survive an attack to deliver a devastating blow. Mutual assured destruction isn't a theory, it's a fact. Fact of life, the fact of death. The fact is that if one side attacks the other with nuclear weapons, both sides will be destroyed. And you can't get away.
The political leadership and the Soviet military leadership recognize it as a state of being. Given current technology, nuclear weapons technology and missiles, given the countries sitting in the either side to get out from underneath the top of the destruction. It was a de facto solution. Was a plan.
1972, the two sides reached an agreement that helped stabilize the relationship inherent in assured destruction. This was the culmination of the strategic limitation
Dragon went into that field. Trying to aim it with a fucking phone. No shit.
Constrain the forces of the other side, which one finds particularly.
is more.
Here's the thing,
That the president
yo. That's Team Radio. Is this it?
We need weapons to be able to compete with this limited capability. This in some ways is not a very new idea. It really is an extension of flexible response. But it is an extension that is incorporated into reality. We now have very advanced, very accurate weapons. We are building merged weapons. We have hundreds and then thousands of them. We need a rationale. Why do we need so many? The answer is likely to provide. We need weapons to strike limited targets in a very selective fashion. And the sort of political and psychological argument is, unless we have that very finely tuned capability, we won't be able to deter finely tuned attacks.
Soviet strategy, since the mid-60s at least, and actually going back to the late 50s, is based on preemption. The notion that if it looks like war is about to occur, the best strategy for foreign forces are to destroy the enemy forces before they can be used. You target your nuclear forces first on the enemy nuclear forces, because that plays a major role in limiting damage to craft. And then you also have forces that are target cities.
I got zombies coming for me.
Negotiations have continued while both sides were developing.
Maybe a gun in here somewhere.
The Soviets were allowed to have more large
Check it out. Check it out. Should only find some. Alabama, here we go. Yeah, motherfucker. Bring it, bitch.
We were far ahead of the nuclear weapon, and then we went to sleep under its feet. The Soviet Union kept moving along, putting tremendous resources of science and technology and money
yes, we're
into the
bankrupt.
development of nuclear weapons. And then suddenly, finally, we woke up and discovered that the tortoise had outstripped it.
The critics saw the accuracy of Soviet missiles increasing. They argued that the Soviets were out to get a first strike capability, not the U.S. deterrent.
By threatening to make a first strike against our ground-based missiles, our submarines in port, our planes on the ground, they think they could make the rest of our nuclear arsenal irrelevant, prevent any response, and thus coerce us politically.
Others argued that even if this were the Soviet intention, to actually be able to launch a first strike successfully is highly unlikely. Professor Kostas Tsipras, I think specifically because of the unpredictable behavior of the mission, because of the reliability of the mission, because of the operational difficulty of orchestrating such a large attack, I think such an attack will never really succeed to the point that would be worth it. Launching. To attack 1,000 silos with 2,000 lists is a highly complex operation where you have warheads from different missiles attacking the same silo, and you have time them, they must go in ways that start out south and they move north, and things like that. So the possibility that all this is going to happen exactly as planned, even though it depends on human operators that have never really practiced it, is quite small. Most probably what's going to happen is going to be massive confusion. Some missiles will go off, some will not go off. We see what happens with NASA quite often. I mean, they want to launch a single mission, and they have to stop once in a while. They can't do that if you're trying to have a nuclear attack against Pakistan. You just push the button, and you wonder what happens. The button will be pushed, the mission will go, and sometimes you do.
I don't think the central problem is whether the Soviet Union would actually undertake a preemptive first strike. The real problem is, I think, that the existence of the Soviet capacity to take the first strike would have a profound and is having a
Damn,
profound
she done, bitch.
on Western political attitude.
The Carter White House, wary of losing the balance of power, gave the go-ahead for the new MX missile system.
The system is survivable, it's verifiable, it has a minimum impact on the environment, it's affordable in cost, and it's consistent with our SALT goal of deep reductions in strategic arms.
The MX is essentially as much a political response as a military response. He's saying we need a kind of shot in the arm, if you pardon the metaphor, to show that we're still competing with Russia. We're able to build large and effective missiles just as they are.
Originally, the MX was to be hidden in an elaborate underground maze to make it more survivable. In authorizing the MX, the Carter administration moved U.S. nuclear strategy further toward counterforce.
MX is sort of a premier counterforce weapon. It has large numbers of warheads on a relatively small number of missiles. The warheads are very accurate. They can attack Soviet missile silos. Therefore, it's very much designed to be a counterforce weapon. And from the perspective of the U.S. Air Force, it's desirable because their job is, if war comes, to be able to destroy the enemy and to be able to destroy the enemy forces. And they want the most capable weapons that they can have at their disposal. The MX provides them such a capability, even though it makes other defense strategists and other politicians very nervous.
It's basically a strike weapon which threatens the Soviet Union and thereby provides them very strong incentives for launching a quick strike trying to fly INS before we get it off the ground. In other words, we're sitting in a situation that both sides have a strong first punch. And the guy who gets the first punch is the guy who gets off the better.
President Carter authorized 2 other new missiles. This one, the Pershing II, is meant to have pinpoint accuracy. From Europe, it can reach targets in the Soviet Union in 5 minutes. The Pershing was scheduled for deployment with NATO forces because the Soviets had deployed their SS-20 missiles, aiming them at Western Europe. The cruise missile is relatively cheap to build. Twice as long and half as heavy as the Hiroshima bomb, it is 10 times more powerful. It can be launched from the air, sea, or ground. It can travel hundreds of miles, guiding itself with uncanny accuracy. But because it is also so easy to hide, it is extremely difficult to verify in any arms control agreement.
Now we are moving into a place where we have a new generation of weapons. Pershing missiles in Europe, cruise missiles in Europe, and other very accurate long-range missiles based in the United States. Now these new weapons, in my view, do not improve our security because they are not deterrent weapons. They are only useful if you use them first. In fact, they provide incentives
13 bill.
Initiating a nuclear war.
Where's
The newly elected Reagan administration used these missiles as destabilizers. They were concerned about the U.S. falling behind.
Our deployed nuclear forces were built before the age of microcircuits. It's not right to ask our young men